Mexico City, a sprawling metropolis pulsating with life, vibrated with an undercurrent of something far more sinister than its usual urban chaos. In the early 2000s, a chilling shadow began to fall across its vibrant neighborhoods, a terror whispered in hushed tones among its elderly population. It started subtly, with isolated reports of older women found deceased in their homes, initially dismissed as natural causes or tragic accidents. However, as the body count slowly but steadily climbed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, sowing seeds of fear that blossomed into widespread panic. The authorities, initially baffled, found themselves chasing ghosts. There were no forced entries, no signs of struggle in many cases, and seemingly no clear motives. The victims, all elderly women living alone, appeared to be chosen at random, their lives extinguished with a quiet, insidious precision. This lack of discernible patterns, coupled with the increasing frequency of the killings, created a palpable tension throughout the city. The vibrant streets, usually bustling with activity, now held an unspoken apprehension, especially for those in their twilight years. The media, ever eager to capture the public's imagination, quickly coined a chilling moniker for the elusive perpetrator, Mataviejitas, the old lady killer. This terrifying label became synonymous with an unseen predator, an invisible threat lurking in the shadows of Mexico City's bustling streets. The name itself sent shivers down spines, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of a demographic once considered safe within their own homes. Amidst this growing terror, a woman named Juana Barraza walked among the populace, seemingly an ordinary figure in the urban tapestry. Her face, unremarkable to a casual observer, concealed a lifetime of hardship and a simmering resentment that had begun to boil over. Her childhood had been a brutal landscape of neglect and abuse. Born into poverty, she had endured a difficult upbringing marked by the abandonment of her mother and subsequent mistreatment at the hands of her stepfather. These early experiences had etched deep scars onto her psyche, shaping a worldview steeped in injustice and powerlessness. A sense of profound betrayal permeated her existence. The very people who should have offered protection had instead inflicted pain, leaving her with an enduring bitterness. This deep-seated anger, initially directed inwards, festered and mutated, seeking an external outlet. She struggled through life, feeling like an outcast, a ghost in her own narrative. The world, it seemed, had always been against her, and a quiet rage began to fuel a desire for control, for retribution. The initial victims were a cross-section of Mexico City's elderly women, a retired teacher, a widowed seamstress, a grandmother living off her pension. Each life, unique and valuable, was abruptly cut short, their vulnerabilities exploited by an unseen hand. As the body count mounted, the public's demand for answers grew into a clamor, placing immense pressure on the beleaguered investigators. The contrast between Juana's seemingly mundane public persona, a vendor, a professional wrestler, a mother, and the horrific acts committed by the Mataviejitas was stark, almost unbelievable. Yet beneath the surface of her everyday life, a darker motive churned. A subtle hint of a personal vendetta, far more profound than simple robbery, began to emerge from the crime scenes. It wasn't just about the act of killing, it was about the type of victim. The reveal, chilling in its clarity, would eventually expose Juana's deep-seated anger towards older women, specifically those who bore a resemblance, however faint, to the abusive mother who had cast such a long, dark shadow over her formative years. The city held its breath, unaware that the predator they sought was not a monstrous stranger, but a woman driven by a lifetime of unaddressed trauma. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The roots of Juana's rage extended deep into the fractured earth of her past, a labyrinth of pain and betrayal that twisted into a monstrous obsession. Her mother's abandonment had been the first cut, a primal wound inflicted upon a defenseless child. Then came the subsequent abuse at the hands of her stepfather, a daily torment that cemented her feelings of worthlessness and powerlessness. She had been a pawn in a cruel game, betrayed by the very people who should have cradled her with protection and love. This profound breach of trust, experienced in her most vulnerable years, left an indelible mark, shaping her perception of the world as a hostile, unjust place. The psychological impact of such a traumatic childhood was immense, manifesting as a simmering resentment that corroded her spirit. She sought escape, a refuge from the crushing weight of her reality, and found it in the unlikely world of professional wrestling. There, amidst the roar of the crowd and the theatricality of the ring, she could momentarily shed the skin of the victim. It was a space where she could embody strength, where she could inflict pain and receive adulation, a stark contrast to the powerlessness of her youth. Wrestling became more than a sport. It was a sanctuary, a performance where she could dictate the narrative, even if only for a fleeting few minutes. Yet, outside the ring, her struggle to find her place in society persisted. She remained an outcast, a woman haunted by the echoes of her past, unable to forge genuine connections or find true belonging. The world continued to reject her, mirroring the initial rejection of her mother. This constant feeling of alienation fueled her anger, transforming it into a destructive force. It was during this period that her alter ego, La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence, truly began to take shape, a silent, powerful persona that offered a perverse sense of control. This identity, born in the wrestling arena, would soon bleed into her darkest acts. The specific trigger that reignited her childhood trauma, transforming simmering resentment into murderous intent, remained a subject of dark speculation. Perhaps it was a chance encounter, a fleeting glance at an elderly woman whose features, however subtly, stirred the dormant memories of her abusive mother. Or perhaps it was a culmination of minor indignities, a lifetime of feeling overlooked and dismissed, reaching a breaking point. Whatever the catalyst, her descent into a dark obsession was swift and terrifying. She craved control, a reversal of the power dynamic that had defined her youth, and revenge became her twisted mantra. Her attacks were meticulously planned, executed with a chilling precision that left investigators bewildered. Juana would often pose as a social worker, a government official, or a sympathetic acquaintance, gaining the trust of her vulnerable victims with a deceptive smile and a convincing narrative. Once inside their homes, the facade would crumble, replaced by a cold, efficient brutality. Her methods were designed to be clean, leaving little forensic evidence behind, a testament to her calculated approach. She moved like a phantom, leaving only death in her wake, further deepening the mystery surrounding the Mataviejitas. The growing fear among the elderly population was palpable, a suffocating blanket that descended upon Mexico City's senior citizens. They locked their doors, eyed strangers with suspicion, and lived in a constant state of anxiety, knowing that an unseen killer stalked their neighborhoods. The police, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated, chasing dead ends and grappling with a profile that seemed to contradict every established pattern of serial homicide. They suspected a male perpetrator, a common assumption for such violent crimes, a misdirection that allowed Juana to operate with devastating impunity. There were close calls, moments where the net almost tightened around her, a neighbor's fleeting glance, a question asked too many times, a sudden change in routine. Yet, each time, Juana managed to slip away, her cunning and nerve proving superior to the nascent efforts of the authorities. These near misses only heightened her sense of invincibility, fueling her audacity and reinforcing her belief that she was untouchable. The realization slowly dawned upon the investigators. The killer was not just targeting random victims, but a very specific demographic, a demographic that held a dark, personal significance for Juana Barraza. It was an intimate war, waged against the ghosts of her past. The mounting pressure on the authorities became unbearable, necessitating a decisive response. A specialized task force was finally established, its sole mission to apprehend the elusive Mataviejitas. However, their initial profiling, deeply ingrained in conventional criminology, pointed unequivocally towards a male perpetrator. This significant misdirection, rooted in societal assumptions about violent crime, allowed Juana Barraza to continue her horrific rampage largely unimpeded. The public, meanwhile, churned with various theories, some bordering on hysteria, each new rumor adding to the city's profound sense of dread. Media coverage intensified, turning the Mataviejitas into a national obsession. Every new murder fueled the panic, further eroding public trust and creating an atmosphere of fear that permeated every corner of Mexico City. Amidst this chaos, Juana's confidence swelled. Each successful murder, each escape from the tightening net, seemed to embolden her, making her increasingly audacious. She had an uncanny ability to blend seamlessly into the urban landscape, a master of disguise and deception, her unassuming appearance masking the monster within. She would often change her clothing, her demeanor, even her hair, making any consistent description frustratingly elusive for witnesses. The emotional toll on the investigators was immense. They worked tirelessly, haunted by the faces of the victims and the growing despair of their families. The immense pressure from politicians, the media, and the public weighed heavily on their shoulders, pushing them to their limits. Yet despite their relentless efforts, the killer remained a ghost, leaving behind minimal clues. Then, a flicker of hope emerged. A key piece of evidence, seemingly insignificant at first, was discovered at a crime scene. A small, almost imperceptible detail that hinted at a deviation from the expected. It wasn't enough to identify the killer, but it was enough to subtly shift the trajectory of the investigation. This minute clue, combined with a re-evaluation of existing data, slowly led to the development of a new suspect profile. It was still vague, lacking definitive characteristics, but it began to narrow the vast field of possibilities. The killer, they now theorized, possessed a certain physical strength, perhaps even a familiarity with close-quarters combat, given the nature of some attacks. The use of forensics and technology, though limited compared to modern standards, became crucial. Fingerprint analysis, nascent DNA testing, and ballistics were meticulously employed, sifting through every scrap of evidence. While these tools didn't immediately yield a suspect, they helped to establish patterns and rule out numerous false leads. The police, desperate for a breakthrough, even resorted to an unprecedented measure, an elderly decoy operation. Plainclothes officers, disguised as vulnerable senior citizens, patrolled high-risk areas, hoping to lure the Mataviejitas into a trap. It was a testament to their desperation, a desperate gamble in a high-stakes game. Juana's near misses became more frequent, the invisible net slowly, inexorably closing in around her. A sudden police patrol, a curious neighbor peeking out, a fleeting instinct that urged her to flee just moments before discovery. These close calls, rather than deterring her, seemed to sharpen her senses, refining her methods of evasion. The psychological game between the killer and the police intensified, a silent battle of wits playing out across the sprawling city. Each move by law enforcement was met with an equally cunning countermove by Juana, maintaining the terrifying equilibrium. The community's growing distrust was palpable, not just of outsiders, but even of their neighbors. Suspicion festered, eroding the once strong bonds of community. Elderly residents became isolated, fearing even those who offered help. It was a city living under siege, its most vulnerable population held hostage by an unseen terror. Amidst this suffocating fear, a crucial development occurred. A witness, initially dismissed due to the vagueness of their description, came forward with a slightly more detailed account after revisiting their memory. They recalled a figure, not necessarily male, leaving a victim's home. The witness described a certain gait, a particular mannerism, and a flash of an unusual accessory. This information, though still incomplete, added a new, intriguing dimension to the investigation, planting the first seeds of doubt about the male perpetrator theory. It was a tiny crack in the dam, but one that would soon unleash a flood of new possibilities. The hunt for the Mataviejitas was about to take an unexpected turn. The new information, a seemingly minor detail, acted as a catalyst, completely upending the entire investigation. The witness's revised description, which included an observation of a potentially feminine gait and a distinctive accessory, forced the task force to confront a truly unsettling possibility. The Mataviejitas might not be a man after all. This revelation shattered their long-held assumptions, throwing the entire operation into disarray. Years of profiling, and based on the deeply ingrained bias that violent serial killers were invariably male, now lay in ruins. The shock and disbelief rippled through the ranks of the police, a profound sense of failure mingling with an urgent need to pivot. Public reaction to this new theory was seismic. The notion of a female serial killer, especially one targeting elderly women, was almost unthinkable, defying societal expectations and deeply held beliefs about gender and violence. It sparked a fresh wave of horror and confusion, amplifying the already pervasive fear. Juana Barraza, meanwhile, grew increasingly reckless. Each successful escape, each body left behind, inflated her ego and fed a growing sense of invincibility. She believed herself untouchable, a phantom woven into the fabric of Mexico City beyond the grasp of mere mortals. This hubris, however, would prove to be her undoing. A crucial breakthrough finally arrived, not from advanced forensics, but from the painstaking work of re-examining every tiny fragment of evidence. A partial fingerprint, previously dismissed as irrelevant or belonging to a victim, was reanalyzed with renewed scrutiny, its faint ridges now suggesting a match to a woman from a past, minor infraction. Concurrently, a composite sketch, painstakingly constructed from the more detailed witness accounts, began to coalesce into a recognizable face. The police now had a clearer image, not just of a potential perpetrator, but of a specific kind of woman. They narrowed their suspect pool, focusing on women with a particular physical build, a history of minor offenses, and crucially, a pattern of opportunistic behavior that allowed them to blend into the lives of their elderly targets. Under this intensifying pressure, Juana's carefully constructed personal life began to unravel. The constant fear of exposure, the mental gymnastics required to maintain her double life, took an immense toll. Her relationships, particularly with her estranged family, became strained, her facade cracking under the weight of her monstrous secret. Her children, unaware of the darkness consuming their mother, sensed her growing agitation, her unpredictable moods, but attributed it to financial stress or personal woes. The emotional impact on Juana's family was profound, though they remained blissfully ignorant of its true, horrifying source. Then came the final victim, a particularly brutal and public murder that ignited a new wave of outrage across Mexico City. This killing, more brazen than the others, served as a grim punctuation mark, signifying that the killer's unchecked reign of terror could not continue. The public cried out for justice, demanding an immediate end to the nightmare. Armed with their new profile and the crucial fingerprint evidence, the police set an elaborate sting operation into motion. Intelligence suggested Juana frequented certain markets and public spaces, often posing as a social worker or a friendly visitor to gain access to her victims. Her routine was meticulously observed, her patterns analyzed, every movement scrutinized. Detectives, both uniformed and plainclothes, blanketed the high-risk areas, their eyes scanning for the woman who matched the composite sketch. The tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. Officers held their breath, their hearts pounding in anticipation. Then she appeared, a figure matching the description, moving with that distinctive gait, a flash of the unusual accessory noted by the witness. Juana Barraza, oblivious to the net tightening around her, approached her next unsuspecting target, her face an unreadable mask. The police watched, their fingers hovering over their radios, waiting for the precise moment. As she reached for the door, a sudden surge of officers converged, their movements swift and decisive. Juana Barraza, caught completely by surprise, offered no resistance. The dramatic capture, executed with chilling precision, brought an end to the reign of terror that had gripped Mexico City for so long. The Mataviejitas, the elusive old lady killer, was finally apprehended, her dark chapter seemingly closed. The immediate aftermath of Juana's arrest plunged Mexico City into a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. For years, the city had lived under the shadow of an elusive monster, a phantom that preyed on its most vulnerable. Now, that phantom had a face, and it was not the face anyone expected. Juana Barraza, apprehended in the act, was led away, her stoic demeanor giving little away. Her initial denial was firm, a practiced performance of innocence. She feigned ignorance, attempted to mislead investigators with convoluted stories, and maintained a facade of indignant confusion. But the overwhelming evidence began to pile up against her, a relentless tide that would eventually erode her carefully constructed lies. Fingerprints, meticulously matched to those found at crime scenes, spoke volumes. Witness testimonies, once vague and disparate, now coalesced into a damning chorus, each voice adding another layer to the indictment. The public's reaction was a complex tapestry of emotions: immense relief that the terror had ended, profound horror at the true identity of the killer, and a deep-seated confusion that such brutality could emanate from a woman. The media, ever hungry for sensation, descended upon the story with a ravenous intensity, transforming Juana Barraza into a national spectacle. Her identity, her motives, her very existence became the subject of endless speculation and fervent debate. Her interrogation was a grueling battle of wits, a psychological chess match between hardened detectives and a woman who had mastered the art of deception. For hours, she clung to her narrative, deflecting, denying, and attempting to sow seeds of doubt. But the pressure mounted, the inconsistencies in her story became glaring, and the weight of her crimes began to chip away at her composure. It was during these intense sessions that the reveal of her wrestling persona, La Dama del Silencio, emerged. Not as a mere hobby, but as a chilling metaphor for her dual life and the silent, deadly nature of her attacks. The connection between the strong, imposing figure in the ring and the brutal killer targeting frail, elderly women was unsettling, offering a glimpse into the fractured psyche of the Mataviejitas. Eventually, the pressure broke her. Her confession, though fragmented and riddled with self-serving justifications, began to trickle out. She spoke of the old women, not as individuals, but as symbols, stand-ins for the mother who had abandoned her, the figures who had inflicted so much pain in her formative years. Psychological profiling commenced, an intensive effort to understand the twisted motives that drove her. Experts delved into her past, connecting the dots between her traumatic childhood, the abuse she suffered, and the deep-seated anger that festered within her. They sought to comprehend the mechanism that transformed a victim into a perpetrator. the psychological alchemy that turned resentment into murder. Meanwhile, the impact of her crimes on the victims' families was immeasurable. Their grief, long compounded by the uncertainty and terror of an unknown killer, now found a face to attach to their sorrow. They sought justice, a clear explanation, and a definitive end to their nightmare. The legal process, a slow and meticulous machinery, began its inexorable grind, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a landmark trial. Within Juana, an internal conflict seemingly played out. Was there a flicker of remorse behind her defiant gaze, a fleeting moment of regret for the lives she had so cruelly extinguished? Or was it merely a continuation of her hardened resolve, an unyielding defiance against a world she felt had wronged her? The public demanded a clear explanation, a rationalization for the irrational, a motive that could somehow make sense of the senseless. And then, the moment arrived when the truth about her childhood trauma, the very bedrock of her rage, was laid bare. The narrative unfolded, a young girl, abandoned and abused, her innocence shattered, her heart filled with a corrosive blend of anger and betrayal. Her mother, the very person who should have offered protection, became the ultimate symbol of her suffering. The elderly women she targeted were not just victims, they were proxies, unwitting recipients of a lifetime of pent-up fury, reflections of the maternal figure she both craved and despised. This revelation, though not excusing her horrific actions, provided a chilling, albeit partial, understanding of the darkness that had consumed Juana Barraza, the Mataviejitas. The stage was set for the trial of Juana Barraza, a legal spectacle that captivated Mexico and drew international attention. The courtroom buzzed with an electrifying tension, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the woman accused of terrorizing Mexico City. The prosecution, spearheaded by a team of determined lawyers, meticulously built their case, detailing her chilling reign of terror. They presented a chronological nightmare, recounting each murder with painstaking precision, painting a vivid picture of a ruthless predator who exploited the vulnerability of elderly women. The evidence was damning. Forensic reports, the matched fingerprints, the compelling witness testimonies that placed Juana at or near the crime scenes. The defense, in turn, attempted to construct a counter-narrative, striving to portray Juana not as a monster, but as a deeply disturbed individual, a victim of her own tragic circumstances. They argued that her traumatic childhood, marked by the severe abuse inflicted by her mother and stepfather, had irrevocably warped her psyche, leading to a dissociative state that blurred the lines of responsibility. They spoke of mental illness, of a mind fractured by decades of unresolved pain, hoping to elicit a measure of sympathy or at least reasonable doubt from the jury. Throughout the proceedings, victims' families sat in the gallery, their faces etched with grief and a desperate longing for justice. They delivered heart-wrenching testimonies, each voice a poignant reminder of the lives Juana Barraza had so cruelly extinguished. They spoke of grandmothers, mothers, and beloved aunts, whose golden years had been brutally cut short, leaving behind an unbearable void. Their raw emotion resonated through the courtroom, a powerful testament to the human cost of Juana's actions. Expert witnesses, including renowned psychologists and criminologists, offered their insights into Juana's complex psyche. They dissected her history of abuse, her development of an alter ego, and the disturbing patterns of her attacks. While they provided a theoretical framework for understanding the origins of her rage, they were careful to distinguish between explanation and exculpation, emphasizing that trauma, while profound, did not absolve her of responsibility for her heinous crimes. Juana Barraza herself remained largely inscrutable throughout the trial. Her demeanor in court was a perplexing mix of stoicism and defiance. Occasionally, a flicker of something unreadable would cross her features, perhaps a hint of remorse, perhaps simply cold indifference. She rarely met the gaze of the victims' families, preferring to stare straight ahead, her face a mask that betrayed little emotion. This impassive front only deepened the public's struggle to comprehend the depths of her depravity. The media, a constant presence, ensured that the trial remained a national obsession. Every development, every piece of testimony, every nuance of Juana's courtroom behavior was dissected and broadcast, keeping the nation gripped by the unfolding drama. The public demanded answers, a definitive conclusion to the saga that had haunted their collective consciousness for so long. As the trial neared its end, both sides delivered their closing arguments, impassioned pleas designed to sway the jury. The prosecution reiterated the overwhelming evidence, painting Juana as a calculating and remorseless killer. The defense, clinging to their narrative of a broken woman, made a final appeal for understanding and leniency. The jury then retired for deliberations, a long and agonizing wait that stretched for days. The tension in the courthouse was palpable, a collective breath held as the fate of Juana Barraza hung in the balance. Finally, the verdict arrived, delivered with solemn gravity, guilty on multiple counts of murder. The relief among the victims' families was almost audible, a collective sigh escaping their lips. The sentencing followed swiftly, a historic and unprecedented prison term that reflected the gravity of her crimes. Juana Barraza was sentenced to 759 years in prison, a symbolic sentence ensuring she would spend the rest of her natural life behind bars. The public's reaction was a mix of satisfaction that justice had been served, coupled with lingering questions about how such evil could fester and erupt from within a seemingly ordinary woman. Juana's final words in court, delivered with chilling defiance, offered no apology, no remorse, only a hardened resolve that left many wondering if they had ever truly glimpsed the true self hidden beneath the Mataviejitas persona. Juana Barraza's life behind bars became a stark contrast to the freedom she once exploited to prey upon the vulnerable. The high walls and rigid routines of the Santa Marta Acatitla prison replaced the streets of Mexico City, where she had once moved with such deadly purpose. She adjusted, as survivors often do, to the harsh realities of incarceration. Inside, the debates about the nature of her crimes continued, echoing the public discourse. Was she pure evil, a monster born of inexplicable malice? Or was she, as her defense had argued, a tragic product of profound trauma, a victim whose pain metastasized into a horrific rage? The answer remained elusive, a dark stain on the collective psyche. The Mataviejitas case left an indelible mark on Mexican society and its law enforcement agencies. It forced a painful re-evaluation of policing strategies, highlighting critical blind spots and the dangers of preconceived notions, particularly the initial focus on a male perpetrator. Victim protection, especially for the elderly, gained renewed urgency, leading to community outreach programs and increased vigilance. The psychological scars, however, ran deep. For the elderly population, a sense of security had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by an enduring apprehension of strangers, even those offering help. The memory of Juana Barraza's victims lingered, their stories a somber reminder of lives cut short and futures erased. Their families, though finding some solace in the conviction, carried a grief that no verdict could fully assuage. Closure for many remained an elusive dream, a quiet ache that persisted through the years. The case became a grim lesson for law enforcement globally, underscoring the importance of meticulous forensic work, unbiased profiling, and the critical need to consider all possibilities, even the most improbable, when hunting a serial killer. It also fueled the ongoing fascination with true crime, a morbid curiosity about the darker recesses of the human psyche and the motivations that drive individuals to commit unspeakable acts. Ethical considerations naturally arose from the extensive coverage of such a dark story. How much detail was too much? When did reporting become exploitation? The media wrestled with its role in informing the public versus sensationalizing tragedy. Yet the consensus remained that understanding the roots of violence, even if it could never excuse the acts themselves, was crucial. Juana Barraza's story, therefore, stands as a cautionary tale, a chilling narrative of how unresolved trauma, left unchecked, can fester into a desire for revenge, culminating in unchecked rage and devastating consequences. Her legacy is not one of infamy alone, but also a stark reminder of the shadows that can linger within human experience, shaping destinies in the most horrifying ways. Looking at other similar cases globally, where vulnerability was exploited by those consumed by twisted motivations, only reinforces the universal need for societal safeguards. The continuous efforts to protect vulnerable populations, to build communities of care and vigilance, are the enduring responses to such tragedies. Ultimately, the Mataviejitas case serves as a powerful, albeit painful message, the profound importance of empathy, vigilance, and the unwavering commitment to justice in preventing the darkest chapters of human cruelty from repeating themselves. The echoes of Juana Barraza's crimes, though fading, continue to serve as a stark warning, a silent plea for a more compassionate and observant world.